Humanity tends to live in blissful innocence of the present and the future, living their lives, enjoying the moment, and thinking that this is their right, their opportunity to enjoy what the world has to offer. There is a problem, though, a problem we can't ignore. Climate change has been said to be the melting of the ice caps, a slight rise in water levels, slightly hotter summers, maybe a drought or two. But the reality is much, much worse. Having studied Earth system science and international relations, I'm able to look at it through a prism of holistic possibilities. Now the issue is that there will be massive droughts, massive changes to weather patterns. Certain lands will become uninhabitable, and we may not be able to feed ourselves. Now the issue with this is that in such an uncertain world, to understand the Earth system, you have to understand that the world is contained, as a contained unit. Everything is in equilibrium, because considering if there's no outside force, then the energy around the world is distributed and balanced, and it forms a climate system. And it's an equilibrium, and the forces of that system act to keep things in equilibrium. It's rather like if you have hypothermia. Before you have hypothermia, everything in your body acts to keep you within the threshold for human survival temperature. If you hit a certain point, a tipping point, then the body system works to put you into a hypothermia state, and the systems in your body will then act to reinforce that state. Thus, it's the tipping point. It's an exponential change. Now, to understand what the evidence for climate change is that our climate obviously has changed over hundreds of thousands, millions of years, going from a glacial to an interglacial period, in an icebound world to a non-icebound world. The reason for this change, considering that everything else is in equilibrium, is an outside force. Now that outside force is the sun. We have an elliptical orbit, as you can see in this diagram here. It's an oval shaped rather than a plain circle. And so this elliptical orbit takes hundreds of thousands of years. Now, the further away we are from the sun, the less obviously energy we're getting into the system, and therefore you will have either the Arctic and the Antarctic, the ice caps retreating, or them spreading. Now, so the reason for them either retreating or spreading is because it's a feedback mechanism. So the greater the ice cover, because they have a high albedo, which means that white things reflect light, reflect heat, then the more light, more radiation is reflected back out into the atmosphere, and therefore less is absorbed, and the planet gets colder, and therefore more ice forms, and therefore more radiation is reflected, and therefore it gets colder, and so on. And it acts the other way as well. So if it gets warmer, less ice cover, less radiation reflected, more is absorbed, gets warmer, less ice, as you can see. Now if you look at the temperature record here, these show the interglacial and glacial periods, which match changes in our position on the elliptical orbit. So as you can see, there are natural periodic variability, and what has actually happened is that we should be going into a glacial period. We've reached the peak of the recent change, and then we should now, of due to our position on the orbit, and now we should be going into a glacial period. And whereas in fact, as you can see, we're increasing the global temperature, and therefore what this demonstrates is that because there's no change to the outside input, it must be changed to an internal input, which, considering most systems are in, the Earth system is in equilibrium with itself, means we're breaking the trend. We're breaking the trend due to certain things such as, you could argue because of changes in forestation, stuff like that, but that's all leading to one thing, which is a change in the amount of radiation being taken out versus the amount of radiation being put into our Earth system. That's why we're breaking the pattern. And so that's very worrying, because what that means is because we're changing things, we're also changing them at an unprecedented rate. Changes tend to gradually happen, but now what we're doing is we're creating more and more feedback loops, more and more. For example, by cutting down the rainforests, less CO2 is being absorbed, and in fact more CO2 from the burning of the fuel from livestock is being added. The oceans, which were a carbon sink, and they took up a lot of carbon, are now being turned into a carbon source. Permafrosts, which hold a high degree of methane, which is much worse than carbon dioxide for keeping in radiation, is melting, and that's having a dramatic effect on the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So it's a very worrying picture, really, because all these different processes are leading to dramatic climate change, dramatic changes in weather patterns. As I said, energy is distributed throughout the system due to changes in the angle of the Earth as it rotates around the Sun, and therefore different areas receive different amounts of energy because of the angle that they're at to the Sun. So, for example, polar regions will receive less sunlight, and this imbalance creates our weather patterns. And this imbalance creates the ocean circulation. Now, by changing things, that's fine, but we're changing them very rapidly. But by changing things, the Earth can handle it. The Earth has done this before. It's not that. It's the fact that we're a massively overpopulated, teeming world with, systems that are so reliant upon, transport working correctly, resources being taken to the city, food production, the access to fresh water. We're built in a very unstable system, and this degree of change, this rapidly, could kill millions, billions of people. We're just not built for this rapidly changing world. And so that's what people have to understand about climate change. It's not that the world can't take it, it's that we can't take it. Or maybe our conscience can't take the death of that many people. The way I want to show you particularly is, for example, with food production. Now, people always say, we'll just do GM crops, genetically engineered crops, be fine. The problem is that only a certain portion of the world is suited to farming of that degree. As you can see here in this slide, these are the main areas of food production. Now, ironically, they're the areas which make sense in many ways because they have a certain climate which creates certain soils, and therefore that has led to them being abandoned throughout the Earth. Now, these areas are likely to hit we're estimated to have a change of between 1.1 and 4.8 degrees C in the last 2 decades of the century, of this century. Now, if you add in the 0.8 degrees C, we've already seen it's between 1.9 and 5.6 degrees Celsius. Generally, people think it's going to be about 4 degrees by the end of the century. Now, what will happen is that these areas are already under stress for water. There's already huge population growth in these areas, and massive changes in weather patterns in these areas will struggle to create food. And if you combine in the huge amount of population growth we're expected to see, and if you add in the changes in people's diet, then it's a really very worrying picture, because we can't solve everything with genetic engineering. We can't solve everything with our technology. And so what happens when people are hungry? A certain world where tensions are so high, countries have to act in their national interest. That's how they behave. That's how leaders gain their legitimacy. If you can't feed your population, then you have the right to do anything you want in your view. That's your mandate. See, with Hitler, the desire was there for them to regain their dignity. And that's what happened. That's how Hitler got into power. And a crisis this bad that affects so many people will break down normal boundaries, normal rules of the way we are, and give legitimacy to more extreme, more violent forms of government and people's will. If you add in nuclear weapons to this, and you add in mass migration, it can lead to a very scary situation. What we should be doing is focusing on our future, harnessing these technologies of solar power, of wind, of climate finance, of fusion, and acting in a responsible, sustainable manner that shows some respect to ourselves and to the world around us. We can be truly great and reach the stars, but it's only if we find the better half of ourselves. Mankind is often placed on a balance between good and bad. We're complex animals, and we should never look to have a perfect form of government, but just more tilted towards what we can achieve, the positive aspects of who we are. Because you're right, we only have one opportunity to live, but that life should be one of responsibility and a true love of our planet and of what we want to experience in the world. That leads to a much better way of being. You can always tell when you're doing something good or bad. We talk of the vibe. We talk of, feeling good when you give people things. Well, we'll feel much better if we work in this world where it's long-term vision, and this isn't a step backwards. We've always done this. We've always sought new technologies to change the way we view, the way we act, to change our society. It's only by the fact that we have been convinced of the desire of fossil fuels. It's been one long marketing campaign. And as our technology catches up, we really must act in our best interests and act with the responsibility we're meant to. Because we only have one planet and we only have one chance. So let's enjoy what we have and be at peace with our world and ourselves.